It is human nature to wonder what it would be like to never grow old, to experience utter peace and harmony. And it is also human nature for some of us to want what we do not have.
Alert! Area 12.
He's trying to remove the headpiece.
Do not delay the countdown.
And for others, to stand in their way.
We are participating in the outright theft of a world.
They were never meant to be immortal.
Who the hell are we to determine the next course of evolution for this people?
Radiation coming from the planet's rings continuously regenerates our genetic structure.
We're only moving 600 people. We'll be able to help billions. This is the moment we've planned for so many years.
How many people does it take before it becomes wrong?
How many people does it take, Admiral?
Who wouldn't be tempted by the promise of perpetual youth?
There are hard choices to be made. Send your ships. Don't let go of this moment.
Looks like you're planning on doing some hunting.
Return to your quarters. That's an order. No uniform, no orders.
The environmental anomalies may have stimulated certain rebellious instincts which could affect everyone's judgment, except mine, of course.
Okay, Data, what do you think we should do?
Saddle up. Lock and load.
Move these people out!
Stand in defiance.
Definitely feeling aggressive tendency, sir.
Hold your ground.
If a court-martial is the only way to tell what is happening here, I welcome it, Admiral.
Join the rebellion.
Blow off the ram scoop. Stand by. Full thrusters.
Star Trek Insurrection.
The Rewatch Podcast presents the Star Trek film series Rewatch. Join us each week as we head into the final frontier aboard the Starship Enterprise. Send your thoughts to the Rewatch Podcast at gmail.com. Join us at our Facebook page, facebook.com/rewatchpodcast, and follow us on Twitter at rewatchpod. Today we're discussing Star Trek Insurrection, starring Patrick Stewart, Jonathan Frakes, Brent Spiner, LeVar Burton, Michael Dorn, Gates McFadden, Marina Sirtis, F. Murray Abraham, Donna Murphy, and Anthony Zerbe. Directed, again, by Jonathan Frakes. Welcome back to the Star Trek film series Rewatch. I'm Cory, and in the event of a water landing, I've been designed to act as a flotation device.
And this is Nathan. And where has my beard gone? I haven't been clean shaven since season 1.
Whoa! I shaved today, actually.
Did you really?
Smooth as an android.
Well, you know what? Commander Riker shaves for a girl. That's what he does. He gets told what to do, and he just does it, doesn't he?
Yep. And we're going to get into that. But first...
We're giving the game away a little bit, as per usual.
What is your history with Star Trek Insurrection?
You know what, man? This is kind of one of the later Star Trek films to kind of come out from my perspective. And, I mean, this is, what is it, the 9th film in the series? So, from a series perspective, the whole idea is probably getting us slightly tired toward this point. Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Next Generation had Next Gen had finished. Voyager and DS9 were kind of in their later years a little bit. So, I think there could be a bit of an argument to be had that there could have been a bit of a public tiredness going on regarding Star Trek at this stage. So I remember this film kind of coming out, and I remember going to the movies and kind of watching it, and it just kind of happened. We'll get into what I actually genuinely think about it as the show kind of progresses. But I remember being slightly underwhelmed at the time when I saw it. I mean, when did it come out? It came out in 1998, wasn't it? So I was 20 years old at the time, and I was probably just really getting into Star Trek. And I remember that I did see this film at the movies.
And for me, this is the second time I've watched it, and like a couple of the previous ones, I didn't really remember much about it, so It was interesting coming back into it. And this is a whole year before The Matrix would come out. So
that's a good point, actually. I never didn't really think about that. But obviously, I don't want to veer too far off track. But The Matrix was a total game changer, and Star Trek wasn't really kind of thought of as a game changer per se by the time it got to its 9th film, was it?
Exactly, and it's kind of something I do. The Matrix was a landmark film in sci-fi. So when it comes to movies and their release times, I kind of, try to relate it to The Matrix because that was groundbreaking in its special effects and its fight sequences and things like that. So, of course, you can't compare the two movies, but you can sort of see where the cultural zeitgeist is at.
Oh, totally. And you could kind of tell with The Matrix that the Wachowskis at the time, they were hungry for success. They were taking chances with their science fiction and their storytelling, and it was paying off. And by the time Star Trek got to its 9th film, as I said before, I think there's an argument to be had to say that maybe they were a little too comfortable kind of in their captain's chair, if you know what I mean.
Quite possible.
And they were not taking as many chances as perhaps they kind of could have been doing.
Well, how about I give a synopsis on what Star Trek Insurrection is all about?
Sounds good, let's do it.
While on a mission to observe the peaceful Baku race, Lieutenant Commander Data suddenly malfunctions and reveals himself, and a Starfleet task force assigned to secretly research the Baku in association with an alien race called the Sona. The immortal Baku live in harmony with nature and reject advanced technology in their daily lives. When the Sona and forces within Starfleet attempt to take over the planet that has extreme regenerative properties, it falls upon Captain Picard and the crew of the Enterprise E to defend the Baku as well as the very ideals upon which the Federation itself was founded. Upon investigation, Picard and Data uncover an attempt to relocate the Baku using a ship-wide holodeck. Then the Sona, under the command of Ruafu and Starfleet Admiral Doherty, would begin mining the planet's rings, rendering the planet uninhabitable. But this is all a ploy, as it turns out that the Sona and the Baku are the same race. The Sona, having been exiled centuries ago, have returned to betray their elders for a second time. Riker attempts to take the Enterprise within communications range and warn the Federation of the blood feud, while Picard and crew attempt to protect the Baku. Picard is captured but manages to appeal his case to a guilt-ridden Sona who helps trick Ruafu into believing he has succeeded when he was actually beamed aboard the holodeck. In a last-ditch effort, Ruafu manually starts his collector, quote-unquote, to mine the planet's rings, but Picard sabotages his efforts and the collector is destroyed. The Baku are returned to their planet, and Picard vows to use all of his owed shore leave and return to spend time with his beloved Anij.
Doesn't he say, later on that he's got 6 months shore leave and he plans to kind of come back?
Yeah, I think it's almost a whole year. It's 311 days or something.
Is it possible for us to kind of replace the word Ruafu with the word Salieri? Sorry, and by people out there who don't understand that reference, Salieri was the guy that killed Amadeus. Or Mozart, I should say, in the famous film Amadeus. And F. Murray Abraham portrayed Salieri, who also portrays Ruafu.
I was going to go with the joke Mo-Hu.
Nice.
But maybe a bit too obscure for people who don't like Schwarzenegger comedies.
I know. So, Star Trek Insurrection was released on December 11th, 1998.
Again, a late year, near Christmas release. Seems to be a good spot for Star Trek.
Regardless of the critical... Actually, to be honest with you, the critical reception of this film was actually reasonably favourable, I think. And I really loathe using this as a reference point, but I did read today that its Rotten Tomatoes score was 58% or something like that. So from a general kind of critic perspective, people kind of didn't mind this movie so much.
Yeah, they're 58% still fresh. Yeah, at the end of the day, doubled its budget, almost doubled its budget. You know, that's pretty damn good.
I actually found too it had a $58 million budget, which I was actually quite surprised at, because this is, I mean, I can't be 100% sure, but this is one of the more expensive Star Trek films, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think when it comes to sci-fi and sequels, I mean, if you're going to do it right, you kind of need to keep that budget up. So you can understand why they would throw a bit of money at this, as long as the previous ones were successes.
And to be fair, this is a very good looking Star Trek film. Like, there's a lot of really cool, pretty intricate kind of set design on this film. It actually looks really quite nice.
Yeah, you know, I can agree. I really praised the cinematography on the last film. I think that's still probably the best cinematography, but in terms of effects, we're moving along nicely. In the 90s, they haven't skimped on the budget there, so the effects are definitely working in its favor.
But this was actually the first Star Trek film to be promoted through the official website, which was actually called the Star Trek Continuum. At the time, following the success of the film, Rick Berman said that he wanted to release the next film in the series 3 years after Insurrection, referencing Stanley Kubrick's 2001. So I don't think he hit that. I think the next Star Trek film, Nemesis, came out in 2002, didn't it? Is that right?
It did, yeah. So didn't quite get there.
Yeah, I'm not too sure I'm sure they could have made that happen somehow. It would have been kind of like a nice touch. I mean, perhaps a bit irrelevant, but still, it would have been quite nice to do it.
And if you remember, back when we were first getting into the next gen films, we were saying how much we would have loved to see Q show up in a TNG movie, and of course that never panned out. But this one, Frakes actually heavily went after John Delancey to come and reprise his role as Q. But as I said, that didn't pan out.
Yeah, there must have been some kind of scheduling conflict. To be honest with you, I'm a bit disappointed they just didn't make it happen somehow. I'm like, surely they could have kind of worked around his schedule, but who knows where he kind of was, or maybe he was asking for too much money, or who knows. Anything could have happened. But it would have been a nice touch to kind of include him into the cinematic kind of film verse, because he's such a memorable character in Next Gen. I mean, if you had to place a list of the 10 best Next Generation episodes, at least 3 or 4 of them would have Q in there.
Yeah, and it would have worked out great for the themes that they tackle in this episode, this movie rather, because, you know, there's the whole thing about immortality and things like that. I think Q would have been able to really, I guess, maybe sort of make an opposing point to it, you know? He can talk about being immortal and talk about the pros and cons of that concept when it comes to how Picard and the crew feel about it.
I always kind of found it interesting, the concept of Q and how he was perceived as a character, because he was such a great bad guy, for use of a better term. I mean, you could argue that perhaps he wasn't always a bad guy. Like, sometimes he was working with the crew to normally suit his own kind of needs. But, you know, a lot of the time he was there to kind of disrupt and kind of cause chaos. And he lived a very interesting existence, and the whole Q kind of continuum and how that all kind of works. Like, I'm fairly sure there's an episode of Next Gen where Q actually gets kicked out of the continuum. He's actually made immortal, and he has to live like amongst the crew for a short period, and it's hilarious. It's great to watch.
And that's exactly what I mean, you know, tying in the idea that humans, or at least a humanoid species, can live forever, would be sort of flipping that kind of concept on its head, and whether or not Q would go along with it or try to talk him out of it.
Yeah, who knows? Would have been interesting to see, but unfortunately it never happened. Patrick Stewart has said that if he and not Picard were in charge, he actually would have made the Baku leave the planet, which I thought was a bit of an interesting kind of quote from Patrick Stewart to come out and say that publicly.
It's an interesting idea that, you know, because in the film they do actually leave their home. They don't leave the planet, but they do flee their own home. So
they do, you're right.
Yeah, if maybe Picard had decided to just beam them aboard the Enterprise or something, things could have worked out differently.
Oh, definitely. The film actually takes place shortly after the Star Trek episode Tears of the Prophets, which I'm not too sure what season that was. I think it was maybe season 5, or probably would have been around that time. Yeah, because it started in 1993 and Tears of the Prophet was in 98, so it would have been season 5.
Oh, there you go. Didn't know that.
So yeah, I mean, because I think, and again, we'll kind of get more into it a little bit later on, but the way Worf kind of comes on board. He's kind of on Deep Space Nine at the time, and they have to kind of get him on board somehow, don't they?
Oh yeah. I've got something to say about that, but we'll save it for the conversation.
We'll talk about it. So far, this is actually the only Star Trek movie in which absolutely no scenes take place on or near Earth. And also, too, they actually give you no star date on this film, so you don't really know when it kind of takes place.
Yeah, I guess you could go to that Deep Space Nine episode and find the star date there. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure they could somehow.
On that, Patrick Stewart actually wanted his lifelong friend Brian Blessed to play Admiral Doherty, and Blessed had actually done over 800 hours of astronaut training at Star City in Russia. He remains the #1 civilian on the wait list for the International Space Station, which is very interesting indeed.
Isn't Brian Blessed, he was the actor that wasn't he on like Blackadder? Yeah, he was. He was in Blackadder. I'm looking at his, and he's actually a great actor with a very big, booming, theatrical, like very Shakespearean kind of voice almost. Like he's an absolute presence. It would have been interesting to see him in that role, because as much as Anthony Zerbe, I think his name is good in the role, I'm not too sure if he's the most charismatic actor to do it.
Yeah, for someone who's kind of integral to the plot, he doesn't do a whole lot. He just comes in and has a few monologues and it's better.
Yeah, I mean, he's got quite an important role, and there's a pretty good sequence with him and Picard, going back and forth with each other. But as far as adding a little bit of gravitas to the role, again, he does a fine job, but I'm just not too sure if it's that memorable.
Here, from what we've found, Wilford Brimley and Gene Hackman were both approached to play the role.
Yeah, I know.
Talk about gravitas there. Can you imagine Gene Hackman in the role? It would have been far more.
They never would have got in. Not in a million years.
Oh, no. Well, I mean, he did Superman movies, so I don't see why he wouldn't do Star Trek movie.
It's a good point, actually. He wasn't opposed to doing kind of big budget, kind of, Hollywood fare, was he at all? But for whatever reason, he chose not to do this.
And, as much as I said that I think the effects in this movie were really, really good, these weren't actually done by ILM, as opposed to Generations and First Contact were both done by ILM. They were too busy at this time working on Deep Impact and Star Wars Episode 1, so they actually got an outside company to take care of the effects, and I think they did a pretty good job.
I think they do a very good job, actually. This is the first Star Trek film where all the exteriors are computer kind of generated. There's no actual shots of space per se in this film.
Well, it's like I was saying about sort of relating it to The Matrix, which again was not ILM. At about this time was when the Lord of the Rings trilogy was going into pre-production, and they proved that Weta could do just as good a job as ILM did. So I think this is a pivotal time in computer-generated effects where you've got the big business ILM that's kind of dominating it, and then other people coming aboard and saying, look, we can do it just as well, if not better.
Yeah, that's right. And whoever did these effects did a wonderful job, because the film really does look great.
It does.
The main female guest lead of Angie, which was played by Donna Murphy, was actually originally offered to Sally Field. I think that would have been an interesting choice.
Yeah.
I can kind of see it.
I think it would have been a bit more interesting for Picard.
Possibly.
Given that, Picard, Patrick Stewart's not a young man, and the woman they got to play Anij is quite a striking woman, maybe a bit of a cougar.
Yeah, a cougar, that's hilarious.
Sally Field, I'm not sure I would buy her as this, super wise, hundreds of years old, beautiful, immortal woman.
What did you?
No offense to Sally Field.
No. What did you think of the next bit of fantasy casting, which is on our trivia?
Okay, so yes, Arnold Schwarzenegger was the first person offered the role of Ruafu, which
Get out!
Yeah. Get some Mr. Freeze up in your Ruafu.
That would have been weird.
It would have. And it's weird that they ended up going with F. Murray Abraham. It's like, we want Schwarzenegger. Oh, we can't get him? Well, get me F. Murray Abraham. I mean, that's not the first thing you would go to.
He's a very good actor. And we were talking about Masks last week. I think F. Murray Abraham does a good job kind of acting underneath all this makeup. Like you kind of dislike this guy as the film goes on.
Yeah, but they do a good job with that facial makeup because you can still see that it's him. You can still see it's F. Murray Abraham there. They got the features right, but it's still a full facial prosthetic.
No, you're dead
Very
right.
cool.
Now, this is the first time in over 10 years since the end of Season 1 of Star Trek The Next Generation where we actually see Commander Riker without his beard. It is the first time that he's seen both with and without the beard, and the last time to see him beardless. I'm not too sure what happens in Nemesis if the beard suddenly grows back. I'll find out next week, won't I?
Well, I'm betting it probably will.
Yeah. Anyway.
But yeah, it matches with the themes, of what we're going to get into. It was kind of interesting that he would go to that level of taking off the beard for a little bit.
Yeah. Now, this is another interesting piece of trivia. Picard was actually originally going to kill Data in the film. A decision fully supported by Brent Spiner, who felt he was getting too old to play the character. This was actually vetoed by Patrick Stewart, and Spiner's script came back with a note reading, "Better luck next time," and see the next film, Star Trek Nemesis. It would have been quite dramatic if they did that. In some ways, I kind of wish not that I would like to get rid of the character Data, but it would have made the film probably a little bit more memorable if something of that kind of gravity to the cast that we really quite like occurred.
Yeah, it would have been ballsy.
Totally ballsy, big time. Now, a little bit of trivia also that I actually don't have on my list that I read today was that the guitarist from the band Rage Against the Machine, Tom Morello, actually makes a guest appearance in this film as one of the sonar kind of warriors. Apparently I didn't spot him and I couldn't find him at all, but apparently he appears in this film under a lot of sonar makeup. And also they actually filmed some scenes with the great Star Trek actor Armin Shimmerman, I think his name is, who played the character of Quark in Deep Space Nine, the Ferengi bar owner who is a total badass and very likable, but not very kind of, has his own kind of methods. And apparently they filmed a sequence at the end of the film where he's negotiating some kind of, land rights agreement on the Baku's homeworld, with the sonar or something like that, but they actually cut it out of the film.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, so I should actually dig up the Blu-ray and have a look at the deleted scenes and see if there's anything there. It would have been interesting to see that because he's quite a good character.
Yeah, maybe it's on YouTube or something. I'll pop it over on the Facebook page and Twitter.
Yeah, I'll check it out.
Okay, so getting into the film, I have to admit, it took me a couple of goes to watch this movie.
Yep.
We record on Sunday, so I try to watch it early in the week, maybe Tuesday or Wednesday, something like that, just so I can get a feel for it. I tried twice to start this movie up, and it just, when it starts up with these kids and the Baku in their nice little village,
I know, and
two times I was just like, there's probably something else I could watch right now, and then I didn't watch the movie until Thursday.
I know, you kind of, when the movie kind of starts, don't get me wrong, it's all very nice and it's really pretty, and the movie is scored for the fourth time by Jerry Goldsmith, and there's some wonderful music underneath, and there's kids in the field and they're ploughing things and they're sowing and they're watering the garden, and it goes for about 3 or 4 minutes, doesn't it?
Yeah, it just keeps going on and on. There's like a blacksmith at one point,
I know,
doing metal work, and I don't know.
I know. So
and then it takes a while, but suddenly stuff starts happening. Like they kind of just break away from that in a big blaze, and it turns out that the Federation is there, along with the sonar, who look really bloody strange, and Data has gone crazy, and he's shooting up the place.
You're right. It's like, I actually don't really mind, once you kind of get past all the stuff, with the villages and whatnot, that scene where you kind of see the two guys in the red suits kind of walking around, and they can only be viewed in this certain kind of way. It's kind of interesting and kind of unique. And you're right, out of nowhere, there's like a fight kind of is ensuing, and you see Data's head show up.
Yeah, it's kind of strange. I can't say I really liked how the fight scene went, because it's a fight with invisible people, so like bushes are getting ruffled and tables are getting knocked over, and then they're splashing in the water, and I was just like, this invisible fight, like,
Yep.
Yeah. And then, of course, like, Data takes off his helmet, so he's just a floating head now. Like, they don't even manage to subdue him. He kind of shoots at the station, which is disguised as, the top of a ridge, and sort of, reveals them to these Baku people.
And I'm kind of surprised that the Baku people don't freak out a little bit more than they actually do in the film. Like, I mean, they're clearly surprised, and they're not. They're obviously not very happy about it, but they don't look like they're totally shocked by the Federation's presence there, do they?
Well, what we're going to find out, because of course they call in the Enterprise, because it is Data who's malfunctioning, they think that Picard and crew can come and sort of capture him because he's obviously malfunctioning.
Yep.
And the Baku reveal that they are completely aware of all this technology and in fact have warp capability. They just choose not to use it.
Yeah.
So sure, they could have been a bit more surprised by this sudden outburst of people spying on them. But at the same time, yeah, they're familiar with the technologies, and they quite freely admit to it.
Yeah, they make it pretty clear later on in the film. We'll get to that a little bit more later. But yeah, so where are we up to? Admiral Doherty actually contacts the USS Enterprise E to obtain Data's schematics, but adamantly states the presence of the Enterprise is not needed. Captain Picard actually decides to ignore these orders and takes the Enterprise to capture Data. It's not too bad a sequence with the whole thing of Data kind of in the ship, although it's totally ridiculous how they kind of get there, isn't it?
It is. Picard vows that if he can't capture Data, then he's going to go ahead and take him out, which honestly I didn't think was going to happen. We said in the trivia that they kind of written into the script that it would happen. Picard would take him out. But I really didn't think, as far as the story went, that they would have the balls to do it. And of course they don't.
Keep in mind, before the Admiral kind of contacts the Enterprise, isn't the Enterprise at some kind of rendezvous kind of meeting or something like that? Do you remember when Worf kind of comes on board? That's
right. It seems that the Enterprise has just been delegated to meeting with races and doing all this kind of diplomacy stuff, no real missions. So I think Picard chomps at the bit to kind of go out and actually go on a mission.
Yeah, well, it's a bit strange that they give the Enterprise, who arguably the most experienced kind of crew in the fleet, and they give them really kind of menial kind of tasks. Yeah,
and I had to laugh because rather than explaining why Worf is there, there's this one moment where they're walking through the hallways. There's Worf. Picard goes, "Oh, Mr. Worf, what the hell are you doing here?" And then they cut him off before he can answer. So there's no explanation. He's just there.
Yeah. I know. It's just weird, isn't it? I kind of wish this script and the Star Trek people took it a little bit more seriously. I mean, don't get me wrong, it would have been a shame if Worf wasn't there, but I don't think it's a total imperative that he has to be there. I mean, you could totally tell this story with a new cast member that would have made it probably a little bit more interesting from a viewer's perspective, rather than have this ridiculous setup. And anyone who's watching Star Trek at the time knows that he's at Deep Space Nine, knows that that's where his priorities lay. They know that he's kind of involved with Jadzia Dax at the time, and which is a character on Deep Space Nine, and that he's like, I think he's married to her, truthfully. And all this kind of stuff is occurring. So, as much as it's depreciated that they go to the effort, I'm not too sure if it's necessary.
It's more like tradition at this point, It's something they set up with the original series movies. Got to get that whole cast back together.
Yeah.
If we don't bring back Worf, then the fanboys are gonna kick up a stink about it.
It's like they're convinced that if they don't do this kind of stuff, then people won't go to the movies to watch it, which I'm not too sure is the case. I mean, if you've watched 9 of these films, you're going to watch this movie, regardless if Worf's in there or not,
Exactly. But, they end up on the Baku planet. They start discussing about how these people have rejected technology, that they're happy living their nice, simple lives. And then everybody starts feeling a bit strange, People are feeling a bit more vitality in themselves because, and this is probably a good point to bring this into the series, because it's really something they didn't bring up in the original series movies, is that these people are getting older. Why not bring in this thing of making them feel young again, you know? And
well, I mean, let's make it clear too that the reason why the Federation and the Sonar are observing this planet is because it has this unique radiation or metaphysic particles attached in their atmosphere and the planet's rings that actually provide what's essentially like a fountain of youth. These people don't appear to age. They've been there for hundreds of years.
Exactly. And that's why the Sonar are interested in it, as well as the Federation, because they feel that they can harvest these properties and distribute them amongst millions of people, as opposed to the 600 people that make up the Baku.
We were under the impression they were being held against their will.
It's not our custom to have guests here at all, let alone hold anyone against their will.
The artificial life form would not allow them to leave. In fact, he told us they were our enemies and that more would follow.
Are you our enemy?
Anish.
My people have a strict policy of non-interference in other cultures. It's our prime directive.
Your directive apparently doesn't include spying on other cultures.
The artificial life form is a member of my crew. Apparently, he was taken ill.
There was a phase variance in his positronic matrix, which we were unable to repair.
I think the captain finds it hard to believe that we'd have any skills repairing a positronic device.
Our technological abilities are not apparent because we have chosen not to employ them in our daily lives. We believe that when you create a machine to do the work of a man, you take something away from the man.
But at one time we explored the galaxy just as you do.
You have warp capability.
Capability, yes. But where can warp drive take us, except away from here?
I apologize for our intrusion.
What did you think of the Sonar overall as a character?
Good looking characters. Like I said, I think F. Murray Abraham does a great job. What I don't like is that they set up this whole thing about like skin stretching and stuff like that. Like these people are ostensibly obsessed with plastic surgery, and it's convenient that these people would be like that.
Now, let me just say now that the plastic surgery skin stretching sequence, in my opinion, is a direct rip-off of the film Brazil, with Catherine Hellman having exactly the same procedure happening, and that film was made in 1985, so 13 years prior to this. You cannot tell me that the filmmakers didn't watch that movie prior to making this. Like, I read that Jonathan Frakes, apparently him and Rick Berman, they went and saw like some kind of plastic surgery kind of operations. It's like, really? You really want to go and see that because of this? So,
well, you can see what they're trying to do, and they've done it to some extent in the previous films, and that's try to introduce new races into it. You know, we can't just call on the Klingons every time or the Borg. You know, we can't do every movie surrounding those things. We need to integrate more species, you know. That's why we have this diplomatic mission at the beginning. That's why we have this two new races, the Sonar and the Baku. Later we're going to find out they're the same race, but still.
I think it's a total gamble, though, and it's one of my main issues with this film. And don't get me wrong, I don't hate this movie at all, but I just find the film a bit boring. I find the whole tone of the film a bit boring. I didn't really like the Sonar, and I didn't really like the Baku that much. I was interested in the whole Federation politics, which we'll get into a little bit as the story kind of unfolds. But I thought it was a total gamble not liking these characters, which I didn't really like them that much.
Yeah, and we're going to get into this whole chase bit because Picard's going to have to chase down Data, who is still malfunctioning and now stolen an away vessel of some kind. So they're chasing him around. And this is supposed to be like a big epic chase, but instead they start having a bit of a sing-along.
I know, because Data is not responding even slightly to anyone's kind of, anyone talking to him. So the way Picard thinks that Data will respond is by singing this song that he knows all too well. Gilbert and Sullivan Opera, and I can't remember the name of the song, but they actually get Worf to start singing, don't they?
It's kind of just ridiculous. I mean, there's been a lot of times when I've said that I love how they sprinkle in themes from the TV show, like in the last episode where they made good use of the holodeck. So this time they're trying to sprinkle in the fact that Data likes to put on little stage plays and he likes to rehearse because he likes to do these human things, and it just didn't work very well.
No,
it was quite ridiculous.
It just didn't work at all, and it's such a shame though, because it's a good opportunity to have some good drama in there, and they turned it into this ridiculous kind of situation, and to try and get Data back somehow. Truthfully, they probably should have killed him. That would have been the logical kind of outcome to that situation of actually, you know what, the whole sequence though with the two ships, and they get him singing, and don't they land on top of Data's ship, and he kind of connects to that ship, and that's actually a pretty cool space sequence. Actually, it kind of looked good.
Yeah, I mean, the effects weren't the problem here. It was the progression of the story. So they end up catching him, and it turns out that he was shot in the head, and that's why he malfunctioned. And that's kind of what kicks off their investigation, because they're thinking, why would someone shoot him in the head? Like, he wouldn't shoot at someone, he wouldn't act maliciously. They had to have fired on him first, and instead of killing him, it kind of just sent him all loopy. Again, they're trying to make it funny and stuff like that. When they finally turn him back on and he says, I seem to be missing some of my, information nodes or whatever they are.
And Geordie
holds them up. Yeah. And it's just like, oh, there they are.
I read one of their footnotes for the production of this film was to kind of recreate the lightning in a bottle that The Voyage Home had. That very light-hearted, anyone can watch this, you don't have to be a Trekkie kind of fan. And I'm not saying that all films should kind of be like that, but I think they really missed the mark in this film. The story's not that interesting, the characters aren't that interesting, and it's just not that funny. And they're trying for it to kind of hit all those marks all at the same time, and it just doesn't work.
Well, we are getting to the one thing that I thought was really quite interesting about the film, and was really underplayed, was that they discover this holodeck ship that was going to be used to relocate the Baku. They were going to transport them onto the ship, take them off wherever, and then mine the planet. So I kind of found that interesting.
So the sonar can kind of harvest the energy of all the radiation, but if they did harvest that energy, they're actually going to destroy the planet at the same time, aren't they?
Yeah. I don't quite see how their plan would come around to actually working though.
Yeah.
Because what are they gonna like rebuild the Baku's entire village?
Yeah.
And create all the landmarks and everything and the rivers and everything else on another planet? Like, you can't trick them forever.
No, you can't, but they'll try.
Leave them on the holodeck forever.
So,
I don't know.
And it's actually a pretty good sequence when they kind of have that thing, because Doherty's quite adamant that Picard listens to his orders, and Picard's like, well, I can't imagine why you give me those orders, that's totally ridiculous. And Doherty's like, well, this has come further up the line, it is what it is, do as I say. And Picard is quite adamant about not doing it, isn't he?
How can there be an order to abandon the Prime Directive?
Prime Directive doesn't apply. These people are not indigenous to this planet. They were never meant to be immortal. We'll simply be restoring them to their natural evolution.
Who the hell are we to determine the next course of evolution for this people?
Jean-Luc, there are 600 people down there. We'll be able to use the regenerative properties of this radiation to help billions. The Sona have developed a procedure to collect the metaphasic particles from the planet's rings.
A planet in Federation space.
That's right. We have the planet, they have the technology. A technology we can't duplicate. You know what that makes us? Partners.
Our partners are nothing more than petty thugs.
On Earth, petroleum once turned petty thugs into world leaders. Warp drive transformed a bunch of Romulan thugs into an empire. We can handle the Sona. I'm not worried about that.
Someone probably said the same thing about the Romulans a century ago.
With metaphysics, lifespans will be doubled. An entire new medical science will evolve. I understand your chief engineer has the use of his eyes for the first time in his life. Would you take that away from him?
There are metaphasic particles all over the briar patch. Why does it have to be this one planet?
It's the concentration in the rings that makes the whole damn thing work. Don't ask me to explain it. I only know they inject something into the rings that starts a thermolytic reaction. When it's over, the planet will be uninhabitable for generations.
Admiral, delay the procedure. Let my people look at the technology.
Our best scientific minds already have. We can't find any other way to do this.
Then the sonar can establish a separate colony on the planet until we do.
It would take 10 years of normal exposure to begin to reverse their condition. Some of them won't survive that long. Besides, they don't want to live in the middle of the briar patch. Who would?
The Baku.
Yeah, he calls it out. This is a blatant disregard of the Prime Directive.
Yeah.
And it is. It really is. And Doherty comes back with the argument, look, it's only 600 people, to which, again, Picard counters with, when does it become wrong? 1,000 people? 50,000 people? Whatever, you know, when does it become wrong that you steal another race's planet?
Yep.
And regardless of whether or not they were indigenous to the planet, they have lived there for hundreds of years.
Do you ever really find out like how the sonar convinced Admiral Doherty to kind of do this?
As far as Doherty explained it, was that they had the top minds of the Federation come out and try to figure out a way to harvest this energy from the planet's rings.
Okay.
Couldn't figure it out. The sonar had figured it out. So that's why they had to partner with the sonar in the first place.
Yep.
And, of course, they didn't know about the blood feud. That comes later.
So Picard is actually joined by some of his crew to actually help the Baku escape from being abducted, while Riker actually takes the Enterprise to a transmission range and communicate the violation of the Prime Directive and everything that Doherty and the sonar and Roafu are doing back to Starfleet. So because they're convinced that Starfleet is not aware of kind of what's going on.
Yeah, and before Riker actually takes off, we do get maybe a bit of a rekindling of an old romance between he and Troy.
You know what?
That's
though,
when the beard comes off.
Yeah, that's when the beard comes off, because she makes this kind of fleeting remark. Doesn't she give him a kiss? And she goes, "Oh, I've never kissed you without your beard." You know, the next scene, Riker's got his beard off, and
she's shaving it off while they're in the bubble bath.
I know. Actually, I know it was silly, but I actually didn't mind all that stuff. It was kind of, some nice character moments for both of them, because for the whole series they were flirting.
It is kind of good, but then they get into this whole thing while they're on the planet too, where Crusher and Troy are talking about how firm their breasts are. They said, you feel your boobs getting nice and firm. And then Data relays the same thing to Worf, and I'm like, they're trying to make these jokes. It's really not landing.
It's just not working, is it?
No, I get it. I don't want it in my Star Trek movie.
Yeah, I know, it's a bit strange. So the sonar actually sends some robotic probes to locate and capture the fleeing Baku, who are kind of aware of their scheme. The sonar's leader, which is Ruafu, or Salieri as I like to call him, convinces Doherty to actually allow 2 sonar ships to actually attack the Enterprise, because at this stage the Enterprise is not listening to Doherty or doing anything that they kind of request, are they?
Exactly. They are more preoccupied with getting within communications range so they can, I guess, ostensibly talk them down. I actually explain what is happening out there, Sure, Doherty's got his orders and things like that, but Picard suspects that they aren't quite aware of the full scope of what's happening.
That's right. So Riker actually defeats the attacking ships, and the Enterprise luckily escapes and relays their plans back to Starfleet, yeah?
Picard is, of course, doing the right thing. Doherty is the one who has lost his mind.
Yeah, totally.
He thinks he does say that it was all for the Federation, that he was doing it to help millions of people within the Federation, but it's at the expense of lives here. I mean, come on. Knock it off already.
Yeah, that's right. Obviously, Picard is kind of down, creating relationships with Baku on the planet, and whilst they're kind of, fleeing and doing other kinds of, he strikes up a bit of a relationship, doesn't he?
Yes, Anij, the aforementioned cougar.
Yeah, with Donna Murphy, which is, it was fine. It was kind of nice to kind of see, but I just don't know how interesting it was.
At the same time,
Truthfully, I found her just a bit lifeless as an actress. The way she kind of deliver the lines. Now, that may not be her fault. It might be maybe she didn't get very good direction from the director at the time. It's possible. But
well, you know what? I kept thinking that, they're going into all this stuff about how she's hundreds of years old.
And don't they talk about like the history of the colony and how like, that person over there, he's been an artist for 300 years and all that
people can apprentice for like 40 years so they can really get their skills down. But it's this whole thing about how living in the moment, like she does this whole living in the moment thing and how you can make a moment last forever and things like that. And I'm like, it's kind of nice. I get it. What I really would have liked to have seen is Picard and Crusher doing this. Because that is a holdover from the series that they never got back to.
And it would have been nice and it would have been satisfying, wouldn't it? Where this isn't satisfying even slightly because it actually portrays Stewart, or Picard, I should say, as a bit of a cad almost.
And I understand they're doing that with Riker and Troy. So maybe they didn't want to double up on, the ship romances. But, I mean, yeah.
We've spoken about this before, man, the idea of giving the crew things to do and actually making them, like, valid parts of the story. And now, for 3 films, they've given Beverly Crusher nothing to do. She's just there, man. Like,
I know. All she's done in this movie is talk about how her boobs are getting firm.
Yeah, that which is really not that interesting.
No.
And so it would have been nice. I mean, I'm not too sure how they could have played it into the plot itself. Perhaps, like, I think it would have been better if Picard didn't have a romantic relationship with Anya or whatever her name is, and kind of save that for Beverly Crusher. Of course, they've always, for the whole show, if you've watched Next Generation, you know that there's a bit of a history there, and there was a couple of moments throughout the series where it was alluded to that they were very fond of each other. Yeah.
Yeah, and it seemed to always get in the way that Picard was a captain and Beverly Crusher's husband was underneath him and he died in action. So there's kind of that thing too.
Oh, totally. And like I think Picard always felt very responsible for Wesley Crusher because when the father passed away, Picard had to deliver the bad news to Wesley and Beverly that their father had passed away. So I think he had a very strong kind of connection there, didn't he?
Anyway, at the same time, Data is making a connection with this little boy who is part of the Baku. Initially the boy's afraid of him because of how crazy he went.
Did you recognize that little boy? He looked familiar.
I know, he really did. I couldn't place it.
Yeah, I couldn't. I was like, man, I've seen you in something, probably some TV show or something like that, but I just could not place where he's from. I should look him up, to be honest with you.
All that's going on too, because like I said, because the Baku had rejected technology, the boy isn't too familiar with mechanical things, so actually having a mechanical person there really freaked him out, and Data really spends the whole movie trying to make the boy feel more comfortable around him.
Oh, totally.
And, again, I'm just like, whatever. This is, he's continuing to learn to be human.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, just keep that going for a while.
So that's kind of what happens down on the Baku planet. So meanwhile, the Baku is kind of fleeing and the sonar are trying to kind of, stop the Enterprise from kind of relaying the message to Starfleet. And Dougherty's kind of, in the clouds. He doesn't quite understand what's going on now. But there's some good sequences kind of between Ra'afu and Picard and all that kind of stuff. Because don't they go to the sonar ship?
And, honestly, I think they were trying to recreate like a back and forth, kind of like how Kirk and Khan had in the second movie.
Yeah.
I think they were trying to recreate that in a way. It wasn't as good by any means, but I think that's what they were going for.
Well, it just comes back to this interesting characters. And Ra'afu, he was menacing. I didn't like him. I believed the fact that he was a bad guy, but that was about it. I never really got to know him as a character, where you kind of got to know Khan a little bit. And his delivery of those lines was so charismatic and just like uber cool. And, you can't beat that, can you?
Yeah. And I guess the final little thing that Dr. Crusher gets to do is that she examines one of the Baku while they're injured because, again, the drones attack, and this time they're sort of like individual beam technology. They can just zap them and then beam them onto the ship one by one.
Yep.
And she's sort of examining one of them who's hurt and discovers that the Baku and the sonar are the same race.
Yes.
And that is brought about once Picard is captured.
That's the big Twilight Zone twist, isn't it? Because you don't expect that. And when you kind of suddenly realise, okay, they're actually the same people. That's why the sonar are so driven with kind of revenge, and they need to kind of make amends almost, or at least kind of get their revenge for what happened all those years ago.
And this is what I don't understand, because from what we were told, like, the Baku have unnaturally long lives. Like, it's the planet that's kept them alive, like, for hundreds of years, and now they actually look younger than they did when they first got there. You know, so how is it that the sonar are still alive? I mean, plastic surgery doesn't make you live longer, it makes you look younger. That's
I suspect they've kind of explored medical techniques to kind of prolong their age. I mean, we are talking 300 years in the future here, aren't we?
Yeah, it's true, but still, they don't really get into how these guys are still alive. You think they would have died by now?
Yeah, I would have thought something would have happened, but anyway. So to cut a very, very long story and probably reasonably convoluted story to the end, Ruafu gets killed, and
he kills Admiral Doherty first.
That's exactly right, because he actually doesn't reveal his plan to Doherty, and Doherty kind of gets the shits a little bit and sort of says, well, that's it, the deal's off now, and Ruafu actually doesn't really accept that, does he?
The Enterprise would only fire to defend itself. Ruafu must have ordered the attack. I can't believe he would have given that order without your consent, Admiral. I wonder which of us will be facing that court-martial.
There's nothing further to be gained from this.
You're right. This is going to end now. The Baku want to stay on the planet, let them. I'm going to launch the injector.
You're not going to launch anything.
In 6 hours, every living thing in this system will be dead or dying.
You would kill your own people, Ruafu? Your own parents? Brothers, sisters? Didn't you know, Admiral? The sonar and the Baku are the same race.
Picard just told us. Our DNA is identical.
Which one were you? Golna? Routine?
Those names, those children are gone forever.
What's he talking about?
A century ago, a group of our young people wanted to follow the ways of the Offlanders. They tried to take over the colony, and when they failed...
When we failed, you exiled us to die slowly.
You're routine, aren't you? There's something in the voice. Would you be his friend, Golna? I helped your mother bathe you when you were a child. She still speaks of you.
You've brought the Federation into the middle of a blood feud, Admiral. The children have returned to expel their elders, just as they were once expelled. Except that Ruafu's need for revenge has now escalated into parricide.
It was for the Federation. It was all for the Federation.
Yeah. So Ruafu actually kills Admiral Doherty, and Picard follows and sets the harvester to self-destruct on the sonar ship, which actually kills Ruafu, while Picard is actually rescued at the last moment back to the Enterprise.
And again, they bring back in that holodeck as well, which, like I said, I liked, but it wasn't utilized well enough. But, you know, the irony of them beaming him onto the holodeck ship and tricking him into believing he had succeeded, I thought that was quite good.
Keep in mind that Picard was actually captured, and as he's kind of being led to be executed, he actually convinces one of Ruafu's allies, one of the sonar, I should say, and actually convinces him to kind of, you know, go to his side, and this guy actually betrays Ruafu.
I think he realizes, you know, now that they're there, that maybe this isn't worth it, really. Yeah. Like, he spent too much time being angry at his parents and his elders to actually go through with wiping them out.
So when all is said and done, the actual remaining sonar, they're actually forgiven and welcomed back by the Baku, and there's actually quite a nice sequence where Picard actually arranges a meeting between Galatan, who is Ruafu's offsider who betrays him, and actually reunites him with his mother, who is significantly younger, and they actually reconnect.
It would have been interesting because, like we've said, like Enterprise went on to sort of sequelize one of the movies at one point. I think this would have been interesting to sort of go back to this planet after a couple of 100 years and see how those sonar have turned out after living on the planet for as long as the Baku had been there, and see how, you know, their weird plastic surgery faces have maybe like fixed up or something like that, you know. A nice return to the story. I would have loved to have checked that out at some point.
Oh, totally.
If only for an episode of Star Trek, not a movie.
Exactly. So it would have been kind of interesting to see where it kind of ended up, but unfortunately we don't have that, do we?
No. And all's well that ends well. The Enterprise crew, you know, they've saved the day and they're just going to return to doing what they do.
So what's going on, man? Because this is 2 films in a row where the Enterprise hasn't been destroyed. I mean, we're up to the Enterprise E. I mean, there's been quite a few of them, haven't there?
Well, can they really have a captain outside of Kirk who has technically captained 3 ships?
I know, you're right.
Picard's captained 2, but if you include the Enterprise B, then Kirk's done 3. So maybe they don't want to go that far.
Exactly. So that kind of wraps up our main discussion.
Yeah, so recommend, not recommend?
I'm going to say not recommend.
You're actually going to go and not recommend on this one?
Yeah, I think this is probably my least favourite of the Star Trek films.
Interesting.
It just doesn't really work for me. I was bored when I watched this. I mean, a lot of kind of complaints with this film is that it feels like an extended TV episode. Which is a reasonable argument. I think the production values are slightly higher than just a standard kind of TV episode. And I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. It feels slightly cinematic, but I just think they kind of got the tone of the film wrong, especially after the triumphant return of First Contact, which is universally praised. And to kind of come back to Earth with an enormous thud on this one just didn't really sit all that well with me, because like I really like the Next Generation crew. I don't mind Generations. I think Generations is okay. I really like First Contact. It's kind of, as we discussed last week, it's top 2, top 3 Star Trek films in the whole series. And this film, for me personally, they just kind of got it wrong. As I said earlier on, I just didn't really find the sonar or the Baku or Picard's love interest all that interesting. And if I don't really like any of those 3 things, then there's not much of a film for me.
Yeah, and I think I'm in agreement with you on this one. I would not recommend this one to the casual viewer or even, you know, the fan of the series, really, because it feels like an elongated episode. I mean, it would have been interesting enough to be sort of like a mid-season filler episode or something like that, just a one-off thing. And like I said, it would have been interesting to see a sequel of it hundreds of years later, but only in a single episode. You know, you don't need to go too far into it, but it would have been interesting to check out. So it's interesting enough in that respect, but yeah, it's I wouldn't recommend people to watch this if you're not that interested in Star Trek.
So as far as my rating's concerned, I'm probably gonna give this a half impulse.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm gonna give it a half impulse.
That low?
That low.
I don't know. I think I would just.
I shouldn't say that.
I would go like mid-range, like a.
You reckon 3, 4?
I was gonna say 5, but maybe like a 4.5.
Yeah.
Warp 4.
If I had to give it a warp score, I'd probably stick around the 4 score for me. It's not awful from a completist perspective. Watch it. I don't think I'll be revisiting this one anytime soon.
Okay, so just reminding you, we do have the civilians log section. If you ever want to let us know what you think of the movies we're talking about, we'd love to hear from you.
Hey, something that we forgot to mention too. There was no Guinan in this one. No Whoopi Goldberg.
Yeah, she wasn't there last week either.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just sort of saying, like, I mean, the Next Generation crew's back together. I mean, I would have thought she would have been manning, 10 forward.
She was an Oscar winner at this point, Whoopi Goldberg.
She was an Oscar winner. That's right.
Might have been hard to get her back, but whatever.
Yes. Anyway, whatever. It doesn't really matter.
You can also join us on our social media. We are playing just a fun little game, just for the fun of it, of Who Said This, where we give out a line from the movie, and you just tell us who you think said it, or take a guess at it, or if you watch the movie, you know the answer, even better. Okay, you got to give me a count in though.
Okay, you ready? 3, 2, 1. Scene.
On this ship, anything's possible.
Is that who I think it is? I actually can't remember who said that.
I'm fluttering my eyes at you as I speak.
Nice.
Anything's possible.
Nice. So, join in, use Rewatch Quote on Twitter and we'll find you.
Yeah, it's a nice little hashtag for Twitter there. So next week, it is the last of the TNG movies, Star Trek Nemesis.
Before we get into the reboot.
Yes, we're nearly on the home stretch there of the 2 reboot sequel.
I was sad to leave the original series crew behind. I'm kind of sad to leave the next gen crew behind now.
Well, we can hope that they go out on a high note. We'll wait and see.
That's it for this episode of the Rewatch Podcast. Keep up with listener interaction by joining our Facebook page at facebook.com/Rewatch Podcast. Follow the show on Twitter at Rewatch Pod and visit our webpage rewatchpodcast.podomatic.com.
And remember, you can always write us an email or record a voice message and send it to the rewatchpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you've enjoyed the show, please consider giving us a rate and review on iTunes. Helps people find the podcast and build up that listener interaction that we love. Well, time to get out of here. Thank you again for joining me, Nathan.
Thank you, mate.
So until next time, there's nothing more complicated than perception.
And what's it going to take, Cory? 1, 2, 50, 100 people? 1,000 people? 1,000,000 people? Tell me!
The Rewatch Podcast is not associated with the copyright holders of these films, and no copyright infringement is intended. The use of any and all copyrighted material is only for parody, news analysis, critique, or educational purposes as provided in Title 17, aka Fair Use. Music provided by Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com. Copyright 2015, The Rewatch Podcast.